Hi. So today, what I wanted to discuss is the boundary still your infrastructure for your IT systems? Before we start, this presentation does not represent the opinions or views of my employer. These are aimed at being informational and are based on my experiences with a view of helping other people. So, why is the boundary changing? The IT landscape is changing. We all know it changes continuously. But over the last several years and continuing even now, it is changing more as we consider things like software as a service, Office 365, Salesforce, Sage Online, Workday. The list it goes on. We have our public cloud providers. So we have our platform as a service, our infrastructure as a service, supplied by Amazon via AWS, Google via GCP, Oracle's offering Azure, Alibaba, all of these providers. Unified comms as a service, Zoom, WebEx, not only those, but consider how voice infrastructure is changing and how much voice infrastructure will you have on premise in the next few years versus what is actually in the cloud. SD-WAN technologies. Many organizations have moved away and others are moving away from your traditional MPLS and VPLS networks, point-to-point circuits provided by one or two telecommunications providers to SD-WAN technologies over the internet. Modern ways of working. As the workplace changes, as people's um, work styles change, we are looking at how remote working can benefit our businesses. And that, over the last few months, I think we all know how important remote working has become and how we must consider the impact on our users who are remote working. The traditional boundary. So I've talked about the boundary. So that boundary is, when I'm talking about this boundary, is about your operating model, your operational model for your IT systems. And the traditional model typically encompasses your remote offices, your WAN infrastructure, so your links to your remote offices back to your core data centers, your user networks and devices, your application servers, your internet infrastructure, probably right up to the interface that connects to the internet. And yes, if you have a website, you may be monitoring your infrastructure from a tool out there on the internet back to the server itself. So when we consider this traditional sort of operating model and boundary in the modern technology landscape, you can already see there's a lot of stuff or services outside. And then we have to consider security as a service. And let's just look at how this looks when we consider, yes, our users still need to talk to the internet, research online, talk to raise orders with suppliers, whatever. But that will potentially be going through your security as a service providers, which have replaced your traditional proxy on premise or your unified UTM firewalls, your next generation firewalls, for your user activity at least. They need to talk to your public cloud services, your applications hosted in AWS or GCP or Azure, wherever. They need to talk to your software as a service applications such as Office 365, ServiceNow, Salesforce, etc. And don't forget your internal applications, so they need to talk to your application servers. So that's good, right? We've got that covered. Or have we? we have to think about containerization. So, to speed up application deployment on our internal infrastructure, you may well have a containerized platform being hosted on virtual servers, on virtual infrastructure within servers on your network. So you have additional uh, segments of your infrastructure to consider within your boundary. Then we have our remote user. Our remote user still needs to talk to all of our internet based services, our cloud based services, including our security as a service. And we can't forget if applications hosted on premise, they have to come back and talk to those, possibly also through our security as a service offering or straight over the internet to our VPN on premise. Then, not forgetting, our applications may need to talk to our applications on the public cloud. And yes, you might have a direct connect, but you might not. You might be utilizing the internet to connect to those cloud applications. And then you have your remote offices. Your you no longer have your WAN infrastructure supplied by two telecommunications providers. They also utilize the internet, so that traffic is coming the same path. They also still need to talk to all of these services. So when we look at that boundary now, and we've cleared away all of those lines and those paths of potential communication, we can see there are lots of gaps that need to be filled. We have containerization. Remember that right up to this level, you may be now using network protocols that perhaps never left the switch before. You have all of your services on the internet. You have the internet itself and possibly security as a service providers. And this is just your users. The reality is, in the modern landscape, you need to encompass monitoring of all of these elements, and your operational boundary needs to encompass all of these elements: your remote users, your on premise users, your containerized infrastructure, your cloud based services, your offices, your network, the internet. So when we look at our client activity, with more and more going online, no matter what size of business you are, if you are a national company as opposed to international, you may not use the CDN. You may be hosting your services, uh, on a on-premise web servers or in a colo data center. But the traditional boundaries still encompass your web infrastructure. If you're a global company or a regional company, you're probably utilizing the CDN, so you're probably monitoring them, and when they lose contact to origin, or you know they may inform you when they've got a problem in region, uh, whether that be Asia, America, Europe, Africa, whatever. But you know your client experience, you may have some monitoring of your CDN provider and your web applications on your on-premise infrastructure, um, but that may be quite limited. But you're not really monitoring the internet at that point. When we look at the modern landscape, and yes, this potentially looks a bit complex, you are probably still monitoring your CDN. In this case, we've said Akamai, but it could be Cloudflare or any of the other CDN providers out there. You have your cloud providers, because you've moved your applications into region to get a better response for your clients. You've utilized the public cloud to achieve that. You may even be using their CDN provider as well. such as CloudFront or Google's CDN. And you've got your own on-premise applications that you still have, not forgetting you potentially have a container platform to contend with as well. So when you're considering your the technology landscape and your operational model, you also need to encompass the internet in that operational model, in your monitoring, in your alerting. How can you best serve your clients by having all of your technologies encompassed within your operating model? So what does this mean? Now, originally when I came to write this, I tried to break it down by users and clients and show the difference. The reality is, if you were to look at these, they the key points are the same for both. Your boundary can no longer remain your own infrastructure on your on-premise sites, whether that be your data centers or your co-location space, your remote offices, um, because you have services that aren't on-premise. The network no longer ends at the switch port or the port that the internet ISP is connected to. You know, network technologies now move up the stack. If you have a container platform that you are utilizing, it could go all the way up to those that container platform. So you need to think about how you are monitoring that as well as the internet. The internet becomes or is part of your network. Your user experience and client experience is reliant on the internet and the many ISPs it may traverse to reach the destination. You know, a lot of cloud providers are probably peering with a lot of the larger ISPs in region or in potentially in country, but not all of them. So there may be multiple ISPs, let alone routers, that the traffic has to traverse to get to your services. So you need to adapt your operating model, including monitoring and alerting, to encompass this new landscape. So the operating model does need to change. One of the key things to consider, I believe, is the traditional silos could very well become a blocker. So when I talk about these silos, I'm talking about networks, your server and storage infrastructure, virtualization, application support, these silos where everybody's roles are clearly demarked, um, probably is going to become a blocker. Now, I'm not saying your network engineer needs to know everything about everybody else's technology, and your application support guy needs to know about the network. What I'm saying is people need to have an awareness and a knowledge to be able to understand where that problem is and the visibility to get to that problem quicker. Review your operational model to ensure it's fit for purpose. There are many operational models that you can look at. You know, don't just consider the traditional silo model. Look at the site reliability engineer model. Look at the DevOps principles and how you can encompass them into your operating model. The site reliability model, I think, has a lot of good principles to build a framework for the modern technology. Because unless you have an infrastructure that is developed in the way that Google did theirs, you are still going to need subject matter experts in those technologies. But the principles of site reliability, I think, are definitely worth spending some time investigating and implementing. Identify key risks to your core infrastructure and ensure they are mitigated or alerted on should they occur, wherever it is. Don't forget, your core infrastructure embraces cloud technologies now. It's no longer just on premise. Ensure adequate monitoring of the environments you have. You know, the single pane of glass is something to consider. So I am not saying there is one monitoring tool that can do everything and do everything well. There are infrastructure monitoring tools out there that do everything. You have network monitoring tools that do stuff. You have application performance monitoring tools. In reality, you know, an engineer can't have them all running. They need one point of reference, a single pane of glass where all of the information can be consolidated and displayed. That doesn't mean it's one tool doing everything. It means you have one tool utilizing APIs or you know data to be displayed in one central point rather than one tool. Don't forget about the internet. Think about your remote worker at home raising a case with your service desk when they can't get to, your AWS application. They don't know where it's hosted. They may still think it's hosted in your on-premise, in your office data center or in your data center in Equinix or Interaction or whoever. They don't know it's now in Amazon or, you know, Salesforce. They don't know it's hosted in the cloud. So you have to think about how you monitor those software as a service uh, deliverables or those public cloud applications that you own. So what's up next? So in the next video, what I'm going to talk about more is considering how you monitor services on the internet, whether it be SD-WAN, client facing, end user, and some of the technologies that are out there and the benefits and the considerations that you need to make. Thank you very much for listening.